Have you ever had an idea so big it scared you but so crazy that your own father looked at you with pity when you brought it up? In 1962, a shy, introverted runner named Phill Knight sat in his father's living room, sweating through his shirt. He didn't want a job. He didn't want a career. He wanted to import Japanese running shoes. His dad gave him $50, basically as a "get this out of your system" loan. Phill once said, "The coward never started and the weak died along the way. That leaves us, ladies and gentlemen." Most people see the multi-billion-dollar swoosh and see a winner. But for 20 years, Phill Knight was a man constantly on the verge of a nervous breakdown, one bad check away from losing everything. Today, we're going into the grit, the tears, and the crazy idea that built Nike. Part 1. The Identity Crisis and the Lie in Japan. After getting that $50, Phill didn't just go to a store. He flew across the ocean to Japan. Imagine being 24, never having traveled, and sitting in a boardroom with Japanese executives who are decades older and more experienced than you. Phill was terrified. When they asked him what company he represented, he froze. He didn't have a company. He didn't even have a business card. He thought back to his track days, remembered the blue ribbons he'd won, and blurred out, "Blue Ribbon Sports." That wasn't a business move, it was a survival instinct. He spent the next few weeks in a state of imposter syndrome, waiting for someone to call his bluff. He spent his first few years selling those shoes out of the trunk of his green Plymouth Valiant at track meets. He wasn't a mogul. He was a guy in a dusty parking lot trying to convince runners that his shoes were better than the Adidas they worshipped. Connection. Have you ever felt like you were faking it until you made it? Phill Knight is the patron saint of faking it. Part 2. The Mad Scientist and the First Sales. So, Phill has the shoes, but how did he actually start selling them? He didn't have a storefront. He didn't have a marketing budget. He had a green Plymouth Valiant and a pair of legs. Phill would drive to track meets all over the Pacific Northwest. He'd stand on the dirt tracks, smelling the sweat and the liniment, and he'd talk to runners. He wasn't pitching them, he was one of them. He'd say, "Try these, they're lighter." And because he was a runner, they trusted him. He sold out of his first shipment almost instantly. But the real magic happened when he teamed up with his old coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman didn't care about money, he was obsessed with perfection. He became the mad scientist of the operation. He'd take the Japanese shoes apart, shave the rubber off, and put them back together. One morning, staring at his wife's waffle iron, he had a eureka moment. He poured liquid urethane into the iron, ruining it forever, but creating the waffle sole that changed running history. As the orders started pouring in, Phill realized he couldn't do it alone. He hired Jeff Johnson, employee number 1. Johnson was a fellow runner who lived in a tiny apartment surrounded by shoes. He was the one who opened the first retail store and actually dreamt up the name Nike in a literal dream the night before the paperwork was due. They were a ragtag team of misfits, but they were moving thousands of units. The pivot. This success is exactly what led to the nightmare of Part 3. Because the more shoes Phill sold, the more money he needed to order the next batch. He was a victim of his own growth. Part 3. The Bank War and the Midnight Sweats. By the late 60s, Blue Ribbon Sports was doubling its sales every year. On paper, Phill was a success. In reality, he was drowning. Imagine being a grown man, a CPA with a Stanford degree, and having to beg your father for another loan just to pay your rent because every cent you made went right back into buying more inventory. Phill describes his relationship with the First National Bank of Oregon as a literal war. His bankers loathed him. They didn't see a visionary. They saw a kid with no equity who was a danger to the financial system. The pressure was physical. Phill describes the midnight shakes, laying in bed next to his wife Penelope, staring at the ceiling and feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. He was one late shipment away from total bankruptcy. At one point, the bank finally had enough. They froze his accounts and refused to honor his checks. Phill was effectively out of business. He walked into his office and felt like a fraud. His Hail Mary wasn't a genius business move. It was a moment of pure, desperate human connection. He found an ally in a Japanese trading company called Nisho Iwai. When the Oregon bankers were ready to throw Phill in jail, the reps from Nisho sat in the boardroom and said, "We believe in this man more than you do. We'll pay his debt." Phill wept. It reminds us that in the end, business isn't about numbers, it's about who will stand in the fire with you. Part 4. The Betrayal and the $35 Miracle. Just as the bank war settled, the ultimate betrayal happened. His Japanese supplier, Onitsuka, sent a spy to the office. Phill found a folder in the spy's briefcase detailing a plan to break their contract and take over his company. Phill felt punched in the gut. He'd spent years building their brand, and they were going to discard him. But instead of folding, Phill went into survival mode. He realized if he wanted to own his destiny, he had to create his own shoe. He needed a name and a logo now. He hired a local student, Carolyn Davidson, and told her he wanted something that conveyed motion. She gave him the swoosh. Phil's honest reaction? "I don't love it, but maybe it'll grow on me." He paid her $35. Then the name. Phill wanted to call the company Dimension 6. His team hated it. Jeff Johnson woke up at 7 a.m. the day the crates were being printed and said he dreamt of the Greek goddess of victory, Nike. Phill didn't have time to debate. He just said fine and sent the paperwork. The most iconic brand in history was born out of a frantic deadline and a name Phill didn't even like. Part 5. The Finish Line. In 1980, Nike finally went public. For the shoe dogs, the misfits who built the company, this was the moment they became millionaires. But for Phill, it was bittersweet. The book takes a deeply personal turn here. Phill reflects on the price of his obsession. He admits that while he was building a global empire, he wasn't always the father he wanted to be. He talks about his eldest son, Matthew, who struggled to find his place in his father's shadow and tragically died in a scuba diving accident years later. When Phill writes about identifying his son's body, the billions of dollars vanish. You realize you aren't reading the memoir of a CEO. You're reading the heart of a father who would give it all back for one more day. The final wisdom. Phill concludes by telling us to stop looking for a job. A job is just a paycheck. Instead, seek a calling. If you follow your calling, the fatigue will be easier to bear, and the highs will be like nothing you've ever felt. He encourages us to be a shoe dog, to be so obsessed with the craft that the world has no choice but to pay attention. Phill Knight's journey wasn't a straight line, it was a jagged, bloody crawl. It makes you realize that the obstacles are the path. What about you? Have you ever felt like an imposter while chasing a dream? Or is there a waffle iron moment in your life where a simple observation changed everything? Let's talk about it in the comments. I want to know what crazy idea you're working on. If you love these deep human dives into the stories behind the legends, you found your home here at BloomShelf Hub. We don't just summarize books, we extract the DNA of success and failure so we can all grow together. Before you go, like this video if Phil's honesty inspired you today, subscribe and hit that notification bell to join the BloomShelf Hub family. Until next time, keep running. As Phill would say, just keep going, don't stop.